Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is the making of Glass, Part 1, Arrangement Elements. We talk about what I use and why. Parts 2 and 3 will be, of course, sound design and mixing and mastering. And I also want to point out that you can purchase this FLP at fixstore.com/SeamlessR, along with the rest of the FLPs from the Bass Wizard Bass EP, one of those. Anyway, this track, I don't know if it's older than Back, but it's about as old as Back. It's pretty old. I initially started off making this part. Yeah, not that part. This part. Where the hell's the drop? I don't even know. That's not the drop. That's the second drop. This part. Yeah. And actually, the inspiration for this track was, I think this couldn't have been that time. I don't know what I was doing, but I ended up around on Posai's SoundCloud. I listened to like his old original debut EP album thing, and I had a lot of these like super old school neuro-y like tracks on there, and one of them was this sweet ass like neuro moombacore track, and it was like it had this almost breakbeat edge to it, but it was like kind of like a slow electro track but with neuro stuff in it, and I was like, that just sounds so good. So I went around to start making this track with the idea that I wanted an old school sounding breakbeatish stuff, and then like real kind of almost basic neuro kind of droppings, sure. And that's what started this whole thing. I don't think I started this with the beat, but the beat is a really big part of this. This is like a really kind of old school sampled thing where like I used a lot of samples that have like this kind of old like loop kind of feel to it, where you just like ripped it out of old school breaks and whatever, and then that was kind of the original feel of it. Lots of layers, lots of strangeness, and like also once upon a time a lot of swing. Oh man, it's there. Okay, so I actually made this track before FL12 happened, and the conversion from the FL11 where I had swing meant that some of the things that were swung actually had the notes put down where that swing was indicated. So you can see some of the notes aren't entirely on the grid. That's because that's where those notes fell when I had swing engaged. So that's why I just swing off, but it's still swing. It's a little annoying, but that's kind of how it went, and as long as the beat is still, accurate, I didn't really care. It also would have been a crap ton of work to redo it all, so that's why I'm leaving it there. Lots of sort of filler moments and just like really like old sort of vintage sounding samples, which is a word I hate using, but that's sort of the point. So part of the sound actually comes from the kicks and how I'm using it. I have like these darker kicks that are happening kind of around like the main kicks, so that like you get this weird like knocky thump between beats. And the ducking in this track is being controlled by the limiter the same way that the Back was, that kind of thing. However, I believe only one sample is doing it, and it's kick number 2. And you can tell it doesn't happen every time, but sometimes it happens like when the snare hits, sometimes it doesn't happen when the snare hits. And like there's the kicks around it that are kicks, but they're not causing the ducking. So like the ducking is actually pretty sparse, and it's very deliberate. It's almost like using a Go sample, but this is a sample that we're actually hearing. Because I remember I told you that like sort of the original that Posai track was very kind of Moomba-y, and I really wanted to try doing that, but I ended up kind of turning it up a bit and then doing a lot more break stuff. But every once in a while, like a full like 4/4 beat will pop out. But it's always got that swingy like hip hoppy kind of fills involved in there, and that's really a main part of what the song is supposed to be. And all the basses are actually sourced from one sound. It's this guy, which I actually explained in the sound design portion of Ruin, but this was originally a 40K or a 30K. It was one of the older Ks, and it was a Skrillex sound. The Skrillex Mile and Otis and Kill the Noise track. It had a very plucky kind of big roomy kind of tone to it, but layered underneath the actual pluck part was a very normal old school sounding Reese, and I made that with this ridiculous complication, and I made the pluck on top of it, and then that didn't work out. The sound was kind of bad, but I just kind of scrapped the pluck and kept this. I kept this part of it because it was really like it nailed the perfect aesthetic I wanted out of like that older school sound, drum and bass Reese sound. And then that when I made this track, I was like, I'm obviously just going to use that sound to put this in there. Like these two automation points are these two things here, and like them being here causes that old school drum and bass sound to happen. And we'll talk about that in the sound design portion. But they were originally automated to create a different kind of growl sound that I'm just not doing now because that's not what was in the song. Pretty much every one of these bass sounds is a version of that. And like the differences are largely in the original Citrus itself, like different speeds of reaching, different kinds of reaching, a little bit of FM to kind of change it up. Like it's real subtle stuff that's altering the overall tone to create the vague variations of this one sound. It kind of sounds like it's just the same sound doing a bunch of different shit, which is honestly what I was going for. And then on top of that, like I couldn't, like making stuff around this was really hard. There was like this thing labeled scary. Like this was relatively straightforward. It was just kind of, that's a rise. That's additive FM with Harmer utilizing the frequency mode in a phaser with a shape that's moving extraordinarily fast, and that is being masked so that it's actually applying its FM with different weights to different harmonics, which is just the coolest shit ever. And I really hope that that's an actual like a real thing that I can control with intention later. But that's what that sound is. It just rises and then it gets cut off and that kind of thing. Nothing else. Like, there's also this guy called Verby, which is just kind of more background stuff. It's like backgroundy atmospheric crap. And this isn't like all Posei inspired. A lot of what happens like in the intro and the bridges and that kind of thing are very like almost Amon Tobin-y. And because sort of the Posei inspiration was sort of the original kick for this track, but like this track took an extraordinarily long time to get away from that. For a very long time, this track was just this drop, and I didn't know thing one about how to get out of there. It took a super long time to arrive to the conclusion to use this bass sound, which I hate to break it to you is not a real bass guitar. Rather, it is a real bass guitar, but it's not one that I played. This is actually not that. This is a layer that we used. This sound. That's just there beneath the bass to kind of accentuate it, but the bass guitar itself is quite, solidly the bass guitar. And it's a little hard to control, but it worked out for the better. And like, it's interesting. I was just thinking of a conversation I had with my uncle, who is a recording engineer, among other things, from like the 70s and the 80s and 90s. And one day we were talking about recording, and he's all up on like modern stuff too. Like this is around when Guitar Rig 2 was new, and Superior Drummer was a thing. And we were talking about like using samples and songs. I was actually recording the very first Krakatoa album, which is my metal band now called God Eater, but this had to be in like 2009, 2010. But he said that samples are good, but I shouldn't use them. And the reason that he said that I shouldn't use them is because, well, actually, I was using them to sort of mock up what the thing was going to be. And he said that I shouldn't do that because there's just no way that I'll ever be able to record samples that are that good, that are that clean. I kind of took that as a challenge, and I think I did kind of okay. And these days, I definitely can do okay. But there's actually some truth to that in other things, because this bass guitar is pretty perfectly what I wanted. This is the Scarby J bass, and it's got the both pickups engaged, and I'm pretty much treating it like a real bass guitar. We'll talk about it in sound design, but I actually opted to try and record a real bass guitar line for this, and it just was not as good as using the samples. And part of that is because like it almost because of the weird fakey way it sounds, like it's too crisp, it's too clean, and it sounds almost like some kind of weird cuts and edits and things, which are just honestly quite nice for this sort of genre. So that that's why ultimately why that stayed. And And then here we have the verby stuff and like a hit and that kind of thing, which I muted all the things. Like real light stuff. A lot of these samples are processed versions of like Leviathan samples, and a lot of these, pretty much every one of these samples are processed samples from the break speaker pack. I did a lot of things to them to kind of make them my own, just so I can have them be my own, which is a huge legal problem in the world, but I'm pretty in the clear for what I did there. And then there's these Chords. And I don't think this is the song where I discovered this, but this is sort of a cool sound design trick where I bring a saw wave down to pretty much the lowest harmonics, and then you use a bunch of unison and have that be the chords, and those are actually like pretty good, like Rhodesy sounding things. And like the progression I chose was very interesting because it has very kind of like weird jazzy tones, which at the time was like, super duper different for me. I'm still not that jazzy. Like the jazziest I get is pretty much like I'm like, I use a 7 chord. I'm jazzy. I don't really know a lot about like actual jazz theory. But this sort of set the tone to be the perfect amount of like, I don't know, like the older school style to be integrated into this. And there's a lot of like this weird bass sample, which is a reversed thing. That's an attempt at resampling, and I used it a little bit, but mostly it's like sort of swooshes, which worked out pretty good for what that was, and that kind of thing. It's worth pointing out one of those basses actually uses those automations, like that guy. That's still that same Reese thing, only I'm actually just using one of the automations that's there. That kind of thing. There's this riser that again was sort of, actually this one wasn't like a copyright process. This is a regular kind of like FM rise that I then time stretched a lot. So like that, all those artifacts and things happening there, that's just because it's time stretched a huge amount. And or maybe it's just pitch stretched, I'm not sure, but I mean pitch stretching is still time stretching, just in a different application. That was all well and good, and for a while the song was just this intro and this first drop. I actually redid the intro, this rise part, at the very tail end of having produced this track. I ended up making this thing way longer, but like I really can't hear it any other way, and it seems to work out for pretty well. And then over here I have this sort of that hat loop, which is very much a Superior Drummer loop that I cut out to be in here, so because not very few people actually have Superior Drummer. And then there's this sort of now what's actually really cool about this whole thing is that like this feeling, this sort of it's actually just a straight, but the side chaining is creating the rhythm, which like was 100% unintentional, but it ended up working out awesomely. Put the chords in there, and then like in the middle or whatever. And then I had a sort of a conundrum because when I was done with this, I'm like, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. So I added an actual Rhodes preset. This is a preset. I used a preset. This is a Harmon preset. It's called Rhodes. Never mind that a human can't play this, but this, like, I had a conversation actually in a recent podcast where I was talking about presets and the idea that as cool as it is to make everything yourself, you should really only do that if you with the understanding that you're doing it because you want to, not because it's like actually better. And as much as I could have spent a lot of time like researching and making a really good Rhodes impersonation myself, I could just use a sound that sounds like it. So that's what I did. And then I had the bass guitar do just a simple pattern, and it still has that. It's like one of the cooler moments in there. The funny thing about this is that like this sounds really cool, but it's a half step up, which is like not used anywhere else in the song. And the bass guitar is like the most out of key thing in this whole thing, because we have like the minor second and the major 7 in there as well, which isn't seen anywhere else. It's just there as kind of a nice fill. it has this weird, like, almost sinister feel to it, but because of the way the chords and like all that, whatever, the particular progression that they're using, it doesn't sound as like evil and sinister and wrong. It just feels almost weirdly playful, despite being a minor second. Go figure. And basically just copied and pasted the drop and made some variations. Copied and pasted the rise and made more variations, like this part here. Like just making the cut, and I could do that because it's audio. I don't really work in audio very much, and mostly because I just prefer to have the synth live just in case I ever want to change things. But because of this being based on time stretching, it is audio, and that means that I can actually just cut it and not have to worry about automating tails and that sort of thing, like I did everything else. And then it just ended. Was that from the noise? Yeah, that's how you can tell it's a real guitar sample, because that noise is in there. I'm compressing the hell out of it, so like as the tail progresses, the noise is just really, really loud. Those crashes that are everywhere, a lot of automation controlling, mostly mixing things. Every once in a while, there's a couple like actual automations for. That's mostly this guy. This guy down here, that's this dude's thing to make it all neuro-y. And yeah, like as far as like content wise goes, like this track it's not a lot going on, but what's happening is extremely like important and a lot just very dense in its usage. Like this could all essentially be one bass patch, except for like I think the fourth one, which uses the automation, but it's still the same patch. Like, is it this guy? We can tell because there's a band pass automation somewhere. We can just go look. This dude. It's the third one. And yep, there it is. I just put this band pass filter in the middle of it, and that ends up being the thing that causes it to be that sound. And like I almost like exclusively used it for like high notes, and then like later I wrote the intro which had the lower notes. And I was actually very surprised at how cool that sounded in the low note land, also with a big high pass filter. This is actually a good arrangement technique for doing an intro, where like if you're not really totally sure about an intro, this is actually pretty much the entire reason why I do drops first, because I'm bad at intros, or even worse, when you're really good at intros and you can't make a drop that justifies how awesome your intro is. Like those are two problems that are extremely common that I definitely had a lot when I was quote unquote growing up. And the solution to that is just to make the drop first. And then when you have the drop, you have all the things that are in the drop. You have essentially the song, and you're able to just like take elements out and slowly fade them in and introduce them. You're introducing them was what the intro is for. So like in this case, I have the basses and like the fills. I even have the drums, and I'm just low passing them. I'm not trying to be clever at all. I have a couple of the weird high passing and like the filtering automation on these main basses, but for the most part, stuff is low passed, and then it gets steadily higher and higher. And we have a lot of these beat breaks in the bits, like extra bars, especially here. Like this track is full of that. That's great. I dig it. That whoopee sound is actually the same sample from before. Only I use the mono time stretching mode, which if you bring it all the way down at pitch, it essentially ring modulates it. And the ring modulates it actually kind of in key, because what it's doing is that it's trying to bring it down an octave by like dividing it in strange ways. And if you do it low enough, it'll do this to it. And it's actually kind of cool. The first time I ever heard that effect, first time I heard the track, the Raga Bomb from Skrillex, which had the Raga twins on there with the ring modulated vocals, I thought that they had done that with the mono trick, and I was confused because I was pretty sure nobody involved with that track used FL Studio. But yeah, I don't believe there's anything else worth noting. This whole thing is a rendering of the bass guitar, just in case you don't have contact and the bass guitar that's in there, because it definitely is a sample library. Same deal with Superior Drummer, which is why I mostly rented out Superior Drummer sounds so that we don't have to worry about it. It's good times for that kind of stuff. And yeah, This track is really all about just the groove, and it's about as much about the drums as it is about the drop. And like, it's not about being complicated. It's about just feeling it and like kind of jamming along with it. It's less about showing off sound design and more just having a groove. In fact, originally there was going to be vocals on this track. My drummer, my old drummer in my band, in my old band, is a really good lyricist, and we were going to do some work, but scheduling and life happened. And then I had the composer's problem where I listened to the song so many times without vocals that I literally could not hear it with vocals. And it came to the point actually when I was giving these tracks to Fixed to make an album, and they were sort of reviewing them. They came to me just being like, "Yeah, so do you want vocals on some of these tracks? Because we can contact we have vocalists we can contact." And it's usually better, quote unquote, to have a vocalist on a track just because people identify with lyrics way more. Anyway, like, it doesn't matter what genre it is. If you have vocals on it, it's just universally a better seller. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a better track, just for me personally. So, like, I pride myself in not having to give a fuck about what people like, given that my career has very little to do with actually selling music. So I this time around, I was just like, nah. Because I just couldn't think of a track that really would benefit from it, except for, like, Forever, but that has my vocals in it. So, like, that was sort of the end of that. And boy, is that track going to be fun when we talk about it. Anyway, we're about done with this track. This has been the part 1 of Making Of. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all the good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.